Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Personally, the last half of 2017 has been pretty exhausting. The most draining part, both emotionally, physically, and financially, has been the laborious task of moving my father into an aged care facility due to his rapidly advancing dementia. He lives in Tasmania, where I grew up, and I'm currently living and working in Brisbane, which is about 2,500 kilometers to the north of Tasmania. I have been making the 3.5-hour flight down to Tasmania about twice a month to sort out my dad's situation, and I have been busying myself by fixing up his empty, dilapidated home in order to get it ready to be sold. I moved out all of his furniture and belongings, save for a pile of blankets and pillows that I turn into a makeshift bed on the floor while I am in visiting. The house is situated in a semi-rural area, surrounded by overgrown trees and bushes. It's an old house. It's damp, everything creaks, and there is currently no electricity, which makes the nighttime very creepy. The house itself is not very secure. No alarm system, the doors have locks, but a forceful nudge will pop the door open. So I flew in on Christmas Eve in the late evening, picked up my hire car to make the hour-long drive down to the house, and I stopped in at a mate's place who lives about 10 minutes from my dad's place to have a few beers and shoot the shit about the year that has just passed. After a couple hours, I realized that I had probably surpassed the legal blood alcohol limit to drive. My mate's legendary wife dropped me off at my dad's and offered to come back in the morning to pick me up and go back to their place to get my car. I entered my dad's house around midnight, and inside the house was pitch black, and in my slightly drunk state, I flipped the light switch, and nothing happened. Oh, yeah, that's right, no power. Using my phone as a light to navigate my way through the house over the creaky floorboards, I noticed that some of the tools that I had left laying around inside the house had been stolen. I sighed and I accepted the fact that it was my own stupid fault for leaving them out in an unsecure house. Some kids probably noticed that no one is living there and took advantage of the situation. It was unsettling knowing that someone had been in here, but I didn't bother calling the police over a hammer, wrench, and a screwdriver that came to a grand total of about $16.50. Good news is that the big toolbox, which I keep locked up in the laundry cupboard that houses my more expensive power tools, was still there and intact. I studied the padlock and the space around it, and it looked pretty scratched up and dented, like someone had crudely attempted to prise it open. "Nice try, jerk," I said aloud to myself. The toolbox is very big and heavy, too big for one person to carry it, unless you're Andre the Giant. Exhausted, I went into one of the furniture-less bedrooms and made my makeshift bed out of the blankets and pillows. I couldn't get comfortable, and it was taking me a while to drift off to sleep. As I was laying there, the only sounds that I could hear over the ringing of my tinnitus was the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. But I could also hear what sounded like the unmistakable crunch of boots on the gravel driveway that went up the side of the house. I tried to listen harder. Then there was a loud gong sound of something solid coming into contact with the metal railing that leads up to the back door. This makes me sit up wide-eyed while my heart rate starts to increase. Maybe it was a wallaby or a possum? I sit there as still as possible, just listening, and I can hear the sound of trees in the wind and nothing else for a few moments, and I start to calm down. This is interrupted by the pop and squeak of the back door being pushed open. I freeze, not knowing what to do. I could hear footsteps creaking through the back of the house, and I hear the laundry cupboard being opened. I was up the other end of the hallway, but I could hear whispering, and the only words that I could make it were, "There, shh, quick." I pull myself together and I pull out my phone and call the police. I chat to the dispatcher while burying my head under the pillow to muffle my voice. I explain the situation to the dispatcher and she says the police are on their way. And while this is happening, I can hear a sound of what I assume was the lock of the toolbox trying to be broken. The dispatcher suggests that I lock the door of the room that I'm in. I agree, and as I slowly pad over across the room to the door, one of the floorboards creaks so freaking loudly. I freeze, and I hear dead silence from the laundry. They must have heard. And about 30 seconds of standing still, I try to take another step and get yet another high-pitched creak. But this seems to work in my favor because now I hear my new house guests scatter away out of the back door. I lock the bedroom door and tell the dispatcher that I think that they have gone. She tells me to stay put until the police arrive, and I tell her that I am more than happy to comply. After about 5 minutes, the cops arrive and the dispatcher bids me farewell. The police did a search of the area and found nothing, as expected, and they had tried to break open the toolbox. One of the cops says, "Why didn't they just use bolt cutters? Amateurs." And we have a little laugh. I explained to the police about how when I came home, some of the tools that I left laying around were stolen, and the toolbox looked like it had already been attempted to be broken into. And upon hearing that, the other cop stated his theory of how events took place. "They probably broke in earlier tonight before you got here. They grabbed what they could, tried to open the toolbox but couldn't, and then left to go get something to open it with. And while they were gone, you came home, and then they arrived back here to open the toolbox. I doubt they were dangerous, probably just kids." Good timing, I think to myself, and I make a report and that's that. I stayed up until sunrise and then decided to get a couple of hours sleep until my mate's wife, Lucy, came to pick me up to collect my car. I asked if I can keep my tools at their place for safekeeping, to which they agree. I then drove down to my dad's old folks' home and had Christmas lunch with him and his new elderly buddies. And the following day, I go to a hardware store and I purchase some newer, sturdier door locks.
This happened in 2005 during Christmas vacation. I moved away from college and came back home to visit for the holidays. I spent a week in my hometown in a snowy state. On my last night there, my friend and I decided to go sledding at 3 a.m. We get in her car and both go down a few times. We're both at the top of the hill. She gets ready to go again, but I stop her. She asked what's wrong, and I told her that I had a bad feeling. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I felt nervous. I told her we need to leave, now. We drove back to my family home. We lived in a town where no one locked their doors. The crime was almost nothing at all, and the neighbors knew each other. When we got back, something told me to lock all of my doors. Then I checked the windows and several were unlocked. My flight was only 4 hours away to get back to campus. I slept for maybe 2 hours. I wanted to see the snow and smell the fresh air, so I stepped outside. I looked at a huge pine tree we had in the front of our yard. I always thought the way that snow laid on the branches looked so beautiful, and something caught my eye. What should have been pure, fresh snow was littered in huge, man-sized footprints. They wrapped around the tree and went towards the backyard. I was thinking maybe my uncle had been out there smoking or something. Just thinking of anything to rationalize why those prints were there. The same feeling came back to me when we were sledding. The anxious and paranoid feeling in the pit of my stomach. I looked to my left and I see a man. He's running. He is sprinting, staring straight at me. He was probably close to 300 pounds and maybe 6 feet, and for his size, he was super fast. I froze in fear with the realization he's not just going on a morning jog, and he is coming right at me. I tried to move several times, but I was almost too scared. With everything in me, I opened my front door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I ran to the window and looked onto my porch to see the man standing there. He had his hand on my door. He turned his head, and I followed his gaze to a man in a white van. The guy in the van threw up his hands in a gesture to say, "Well." The runner just threw up his hands and shook his head. The runner walked to the van, got in, and they drove away. My heart was still pounding, and I woke up my friend and made her walk around the house with me. There we found the footprints went to every door and window around my house. She's too tired to rationalize it, but to me, I know if he had reached me, I wouldn't be writing this post. The malicious look on his face as he ran to me told me everything.
This happened in 2019. I was in my second year of college and living in a townhouse, about a 10-minute walk from campus. I lived with 2 other girls at the time, but they were all back at their parents' house for the holiday. I work in healthcare and was working Christmas this year. A little bit of backstory. There used to be 4 of us living there, but one girl had moved out due to issues with her boyfriend. He was a jackass who abused our kindness on allowing him to stay there. He was only supposed to come every so often, but basically ended up living there. We told her she needed to kick him out after an incident with him one night after he got physical with her and verbally abusive with the rest of us. She wouldn't listen, and we told her we would have to talk to the landlord then. Long story short, she ended up moving out and left on bad terms with us. On another side note here, I have been in a physically and mentally abusive relationship before, so I understand how things may have been going for her. I tried my best for 2 years at that point to help open her eyes to the abuse and get her away from him. At this point, it was affecting everyone, and we didn't feel safe with him there. So she moved out. Okay, back to the story. It was Christmas Eve, and I worked the next day, so I was getting ready for bed. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and went downstairs where my bedroom was. I was scrolling on TikTok for about an hour. It was Christmas Day at this point, when I heard what sounded like the chairs in the kitchen move. The kitchen is right above my bedroom. I thought maybe I was hearing the neighbors next door as we share the same walls, and sometimes they can be loud. But I remembered one of them texting me and asking me to bring in a package they were expecting while they were all gone at home. The noise was short-lived, so I just brushed it off. Next thing I know, my bedroom door is being opened, slowly. In this moment, I get a flashback and remember my second grade teacher telling us about the time someone broke into her house. And she acted as if she were asleep. So if they were just there to rob her, they wouldn't feel the need to hurt her if she saw them. But my freaking phone screen is lighting up my scared jaw-dropped face, so I can't act like I'm asleep. Where I'm laying in bed faces directly to the door, so we're just looking right at each other. So there I was, laying in my bed, shitting myself while this guy has one foot in my bedroom, with the door cracked open. It felt like an eternity, but in reality, was probably more than 10 seconds of us looking at one another. He slowly takes his foot out and closes my door. I sit there just in complete and utter shock. I couldn't make out what he looked like as my eyes were adjusting to the dark again from the phone screen All I could see was a backwards baseball cap. I knew I had to call the police, but my anxious ass knew if I called, it would also alert my parents' phones that I called. Me being dumb as hell, I was like, well, I don't want to make them worry. Also, I was scared he might still be somewhere in the house, and I didn't know what he would do if he heard me call. So I texted the guy I was seeing at the time and tell him some random guy just broke into my house and came into my room. He snapped me out of it and told me to call the police, and so I did. The dispatcher asked me if I felt comfortable to go unlock the door for them so they didn't have to break it down. And I told her, no way. I don't care if the door is broken. I'm not going up there alone. A couple of minutes later, I see flashlights shining through my window. I hear the police knocking at the door and announcing themselves. They got in and asked me where I was. I came out of my room and they came and got me. They told me to go wait on the back porch while two of them searched the house, and one stayed with me. It was like that shit you see in the movies, where they have their guns and turn the corner with their partner and everything. They didn't find anyone, and they said nothing looked like it had been taken. They even tried to get fingerprints but were unsuccessful. They then started asking me questions and informed me that the back door was unlocked and had no signs it had been broken. I told them I locked it. Luckily, the guy I was talking to stayed with me that night, but I still couldn't sleep. I kept having to go check every inch of the house over and over. I placed chairs under the door handles of the front door, back door, and my bedroom door. The next day, I informed our landlord, and she refused to come out and change the locks, and she never ended up changing them for the rest of the time we lived there. Every time I go to bed now, I triple check all the doors have been locked. Doesn't matter where I am. I have a dog now, and he helps my anxiety of intruders, as well as a recent purchase of a Ring doorbell. I believe it was our old roommate's boyfriend. I think they may have made an extra key for him because he was basically living there. But I don't understand why he didn't do anything to me, the house, or our belongings. If it was someone random, I don't know why they wouldn't have done what they intended, and that could be many different possibilities. I don't know what their intentions were that night, but to the man who broke into my house on Christmas Eve, let's not meet again.
First off, I am living very rural, in a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway. I mean, you can drive there within maybe 5 minutes, and also about 10 minutes away from the town. If you cross the street, it just takes you about a 10-minute walk to reach the forest. First Christmas Day. In the afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all that food. It was about 5 p.m. and already dark when we left, and we had a big and bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest and then turn right, following a small graveled cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village and the next, maybe a 15 to 20 minute walk between villages. In the middle part of the track, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark and the trees are very high and quite dense. And when we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something and recognized a car being parked there on the side of the track close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive there and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside of the car, and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parking there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure. I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it, so I could focus better and photograph it with my flash. And after I took a few images, my partner told me, there's someone standing behind us in the middle of the road. He's looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time in the evening and close to the border of the forest, there are boars sometimes, and it's mating season, so they are more aggressive than usual. But indeed, there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first, I thought he might be startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone is just taking photos around your car. But it wasn't even legal to drive on that path with a car. So I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and still just stood there. I then went to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that it wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for this behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just get the hell away from there and follow the path leading to the next village. There was maybe around 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remember the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and I googled it, and it turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country that I live in is in a very strict lockdown right now, so you are only allowed to travel if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around, and then going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off, and he didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than we initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then. But I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details, which was a big regret that I didn't memorize the whole license plate. But it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't even think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows and that he could possibly have walked behind us, plus him having no light and not responding. He didn't seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down to take a photo. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone. So, creepy guy sneaking around the forest, let's not meet.
I was always ecstatic when it came time for Christmas as a kid. I was always that kid who went all out with it, but that was also partially my mom's fault. She loved buying us matching outfits. My older brother and dad didn't care for it, but we enjoyed it. So, needless to say, I was never short on festive outfits. I loved to decorate our living room and the tree. I remember I was very picky at like 6 or 7 years old about how the ornaments and garland were strewn out on the tree. I always made it to where we had an extra strand so I could use it as decorations in my room or my backpack or something. Another part of this exciting time for me was Santa. I was a firm believer, and you can bet that I did everything I was supposed to do to make sure that I was on that nice list. From doing chores, homework was done as soon as I got home from school. I behaved as much as possible, as long as my brother wasn't pestering me, things like that. I made a very organized wish list, and I laid out the best cookies and carrots for him and the reindeer. However, the one thing I was never able to do was catch him in the act. I wanted to see him leaving the presents and see how he got in, since we didn't have a fireplace anymore. Every year, I tried staying up all night. Being a kid, though, I didn't have many options. I tried counting, reading. I tried to watch TV on a very low volume so I didn't wake up my parents, but I would always end up crashing. Of course, one of those years that I would end up falling asleep early would be when I finally got to see him. This Christmas Eve was like the others. I tried to stay up as late as possible with my parents while we watched a movie, and I thought I would eat as much sweets as my parents would let me, in hopes that I might get a sugar high and keep myself awake. They didn't fall for it, though, and they rushed me off to bed around 10 p.m., so now I had to try and stay up on my own in my room. This, of course, didn't work, and I ended up crashing from the sugar maybe an hour or two in. However, I woke up around 2 in the morning to use the restroom, and as I was heading back to my room, I could hear shuffling sounds coming from the living room. How our house was set up was the front entrance led into the back living room, where we usually had the tree and presents set up. To the left was a small hallway with stairs leading to the second floor, where my parents' room was, but at the end of the hallway was our more used front living room, and the other side of the front room had my room, my brother Isaiah's room, and the bathroom. I looked around the hall where the bathroom was, and tried to look down the hallway where the back room was. That's when it finally clicked in my little head that I was finally going to meet Santa Claus in my own home. I slowly tiptoed towards the hall to get a close-up of the man in red. I got to the end and saw a big, dirty red bag sitting next to the tree, and the man bending over moving around presents. I just remember standing there in awe, not knowing what to do next, so I watched him for a moment when I noticed that he put the present he was holding into the bag. My little kid mind immediately thought maybe he got the houses mixed up and thought this was a good time for me to help. I slowly whispered, "This is the last name household." And I've never seen someone turn around so fast in my life. It actually scared me too. He just stood there staring at me for several seconds with the widest eyes. So I apologized for scaring him and told him I didn't want him to get any presents mixed up, so I was letting him know our names. And then I told him my name was Jasmine and my brother's name was Isaiah. He continued to stand there for a few more seconds until I asked him if he'd had the cookies yet, to which he seemed to relax a bit more and softly said no. I smiled and asked if he wanted to try them now. He smiled back and said yes. So I swiftly grabbed the tray from the kitchen table, which was back behind the living room on the other side. When I came back to the room, he was still standing there and looking around, so I handed out the tray to him. He took a cookie and the glass of milk and began eating it. I was excited because I had asked to make homemade cookies that year, and I was telling him how I made them. That's when he was smiling and kneeled down to look me in the face and said, I can tell you've been a good girl this year." I remember being so excited about this because if Santa is telling you this directly, it has to be true. And why would I not get what I wanted from my list then? I hugged him and remembered talking to him for a while longer about all kinds of things. I even mentioned my brother not believing in him and that it was going to be funny telling him this. That's when he became more serious and said that I couldn't tell my brother about him being here, or anyone for that matter. Curious, I asked him why, as I thought it would make more sense for people to believe in him. His response was something to the effect of that it's the small mysteries and random gifts that appear that make him more believable. He just seemed so wise to my child self. Shortly after, he mentioned that he needed to get going so he could finish the work, but then I asked him if I got this specific doll that I wanted. He said yes, but that next year, I should ask for something bigger, like a game console because I've been so good. I told him that I would, but that my brother asked for one this year, so I wanted to make sure that was okay. He again looked back over at our tree and smiled and said I could, but to keep the door unlocked on Christmas night so that it's easier for him to get in. And he also asked to keep it unlocked tonight as well, in case he needed to come back to drop off extras, and then winked at me. I excitedly agreed to do so, and as he approached the door, I asked him to wait there, and I ran to grab the carrots for the reindeers. I wanted to ask if I could feed them to the reindeers myself, when I saw my brother groggily standing by our rooms and staring at me. When I saw him, I cut my question off in the middle and started staring at him. And that's when he started walking toward us and asked, "Jasmine, who is that?" I started looking over at Santa, and he quickly shoved me to the ground and started struggling to unlock the door. My brother started running toward us and shouting for my parents. He then yelled at me to get them, but I just froze in fear. My brother was now trying to fight Santa and stopping him from leaving. Thankfully, my parents heard the commotion and came running out of their room. That's when Santa punched my brother, though, and managed to run out the door. My dad took off out the door after him, and my mom was helping my brother up and was asking if we were okay and what had happened. If you haven't guessed yet, my dreams of meeting Santa were crushed when I found out that it was a cleverly disguised burglar trying to steal all of our new presents. My dad didn't catch him, but at least saw which direction he went, and the cops ended up catching him later that night. His bag of presents had a few of ours, as well as some of the neighbors. If I hadn't caught him in the act, he may have gotten away with it, or at least got a lot more before he was caught. For my age, I was heartbroken, and it was hard for me to get past that, but I'm also a bit thankful because I was able to distract him until my brother woke up, which stopped other families from having an unexpected surprise as well. So, just lock your doors and your windows, guys, no matter how safe you think you are in your neighborhood.
You Stole My Candy Cane. Written and narrated by Lady SPOOKARIA. I love Christmas. It is my favorite time of year. And I need to make sure everything is perfect. And I mean everything. Absolutely perfect. I don't want to disappoint anyone, ever. I make sure my house is perfectly spotless, presentable, and richly decorated. I need everyone in the street, no, the state to know how much my house is the best. Our Christmas lights are extravagant displays that the local papers even promote. I am, what you could say, a local celebrity. I get to see the envious look on my neighbors' faces and watch their insecure smiles. I know deep down they would love to be where I am, but not everyone can be at the top. I especially love getting pictures with them and looking at the photos well after the festive season has passed. Our little cul-de-sac becomes the highlight of the community. My entire family joins in. They know better than to make me angry. They wear the fancy Christmas sweaters, Santa hats, help putting everything out. It has to be perfect. Anyway, the ornaments outside are well known throughout the community. There are reindeer, a nativity scene, Santa's elves, anything and everything you can imagine. We have little goodies bags we give out to children. And I've been interviewed so many times by the local news reporters. This is my game. So, as one would expect, when that bitch moved in across the road with her lofty goals for being my rival, I needed to take a stand. It didn't matter that she has a different style or people love both our places. No. She has to go. One day, I was cleaning the kitchen and I looked out the window to see her son steal a candy cane from my tree. We have cameras, sure, but it always stings different when you get to see what happens with your own eyes. That little shit destroyed the design. He needed to be taught a lesson. I fixed my hair, wore my most polite smile as my heels clicked as I walked across the road to their house. I knocked on the door and told her what happened. I expected some kind of punishment. But all I got was the kid giving me an apology. Just a simple apology. Nothing else. How I wanted to cause a scene. I couldn't though. I smiled and thanked her for her time. How could that bitch realize what she was doing to me? To my glorious display. Oh, this would not go unpunished. I put out a replacement candy cane and the little shit kept his hands to himself. My mother taught me never to let anyone disrespect you. That boy and his mother would have to pay. I waited until Christmas Eve to hatch my plan. I faked being sick and encouraged my husband and the kids to take over for me. The good thing about having cameras around the house is you can offer advice and criticism to them when they slip up, which is often. Tell them to smile more or to show off to the guests. While that was taking place, I went over to the neighbour's house, and fortunately, people were busy looking at my home and enjoying the holiday season. I had a box of candy canes. Oh, I was going to make sure they knew never to mess with me ever again. I went over with my famous eggnog that may or may not have been laced with sleeping pills. I knocked on the door. The mother looked confused but was happy to let both me and my peace offering inside her home. I told them it was best to let bygones be bygones. I told them to sit down, poured them some eggnog, and watched while each of them drank. Outside, the song Jingle Bells filled my ears as the carolers sang. I secured them, and I know this was a risky move. But you don't become the St. Woodsville Avenue Christmas lawn display grand champion 7 times in a row by being a little bitch. They were tied with their backs together, gagged, and I readied my box of candy canes. The ungrateful shits better stick to the damn script. They woke up, squirmed, and let out a muffled scream through their gags. Perfect. Just as I had planned. So, do you like my candy canes? I rested one against her cheek. I don't think she understood my artistic style and gave me a bitchy look. That wouldn't do. I took the end and pushed it into her eye. It made a squishing pop sound as it entered and she screamed. Now, I am not a violent woman. I don't have a violent bone in my body, but sometimes you need to correct a bitch. I used a knife to sharpen the candy canes and plunged half a pack into her eyes. I would be making a statement. She screamed, thrashed around. I'm pretty sure she said words that were inappropriate around children. So damn crass. She whimpered and went limp. Just as bland as her pathetic gingerbread men, I'm sure, were purchased from Walmart. Next, I went to her son. The little shit who couldn't keep his damn hands to himself. Now, I love children. They are all precious angels. Except this kid. Now, you brought this on yourself. No one messes with my Christmas. Including you. I said and drove the candy canes into his eyes. Just like his mother. It may not have been creative or anything. I kept adding more and more until he matched her. And he passed away. Just like her. I cleaned up before I left. Made sure I left no hair or fingerprints. No sign I had been there. There were many strangers in the streets, so I could say I saw a creepy vagrant passing by. I went back to my house, cleaned myself up a bit, and went outside to greet the guests. My family looked confused and relieved. No one suspected a thing. Have a merry, merry Christmas.
Christmas for most people is a happy occasion, if they celebrate it, that is. Occasionally, there are those that forget to leave a little something out for Santa, or somehow manage to insult the elves, or there is simply not enough money to buy Timmy the latest toy he wants, something expensive and will be discarded within a year for the next overpriced piece of garbage. Children will receive presents. Parents will watch as the children play and show excitement about what they had received. Parents flexing on each other whose children ended up gaining the most presents. The cheesy photographs, spending time with family that you barely tolerate or like, all because it is part of the holidays. Being able to blame Santa spoiling their children while other children can't get a present, wonder what exactly they did wrong. The perfection consumer paradise of gluttony and excess. In some cases, it doesn't matter if they had been well behaved or not. Maybe Krampus should be taking these parents instead. However, he is rather stuck in his ways. Krampus has a quota of children that he needs to take each year, at least according to him, and I haven't found anything to say otherwise. Every year, you get to hear parents complain about how children always find new ways to disrespect their parents and society as a whole, considering most of them are spending their times comparing to the previous generations that they have glorified. They tend to forget their own misgivings in favor of the good old days. The time when children respected their parents, society was better overall, and everything else, yada yada yada. Whatever those were supposed to be. Krampus in the USA has grown in popularity in the recent years. People can embrace the spookier elements of Santa, get into the Christmas spirit, and laugh at the idea of bratty kids being punished for being obnoxious. What people don't realize is that Krampus is a real-life entity, and he is my father. We have a slightly strange relationship, and you will soon discover why. While Saint Nick is out giving presents and good cheer, Krampus is seeking out the children that cause the most issues to take away with him. Now, why are there so many entitled little shits these days? You could blame anything really. I suppose social media, kids not being disciplined, or parents being out of the home, or maybe blame it on schools or influencers encouraging children to be outrageous. Truth is, kids have always had a tendency to be naughty. Krampus serves a purpose. He will take the children who are naughty. There are a lot of children to choose from, and that is where I come in. It is my job to select the children that are taken, depending on how much I've had to drink, or whether I've been offered any gifts. The decision to take a child is mostly on a whim. Last year, 10 children were taken, the usual number, sometimes more and sometimes fewer children. You really don't want to know what happens to them. It's bloody, and I've only just managed to get the gore out of my hair. Sometimes, I go by kids who are rotten. You know, the ones who will grow up to be psychos and you do the world a favor by getting rid of. Admit it, you've thought that yourself more than once when you see these kids. Come on, just admit it to yourself. Other times, I have to admit, sometimes I go down a more chaotic route. Why? What's my reason? Pure entertainment. Once I have selected the children, I write down the children's names in ash and blood on a piece of parchment before burning it in an open flame. I'm not sure of the exact process, but the name will go up in the flames and it gets sent to Krampus. Once the kids' names are written down, it's permanent. There is no redemption and no getting back. Krampus will arrive around December the 5th to claim the naughty children. The more intuitive of you may realize something is coming, and there are ways that can ward him off. Not that I will tell you them. He will find a way into your home, scoop up the child and throw them into his sack before heading off to find the next child on his list. The sack moving with the squirming and screaming kids while Krampus takes them away, never to be seen by their family ever again. Have you ever noticed that around December, a lot of children tend to go missing? There will be missing posters going up and campaigns on Facebook in order to find the children. It will be as if they simply disappeared, gone. Parents and their families will spend a lifetime worrying and wondering what happened to their child, wishing they could have done something, anything different. Now, knowing all of this, knowing that you will never see him again, knowing that he will suffer a terrible fate, knowing he will never be found, are you sure that you want Krampus to take your little brother?
When it comes to finding out that Santa Claus isn't real, I had a pretty uniquely terrifying experience. I loved Christmas. I mean, I still do, but as a child, I absolutely could not sleep on Christmas Eve. I tried to spy Santa a million times. I'd wait for my parents to go to bed and try to sneak out of my room. They'd catch me every time. Except one year, I got close. I was in second grade and young for my class, so 6 or 7 years old. I recall my best friend at school saying something like, I should pretend to be asleep, then my parents will go to sleep faster, so I could sneak out to meet Santa. It would be easier. Perfect. So Christmas Eve shows up. I'm riddled with angst, and I remember my friend's advice. Pretend to be asleep. And so that's what I did. Before A Christmas Story was even over, I started to act sleepy. I don't know how great my acting skills were, but good enough to where my dad said he should just take me up to bed. I obliged and allowed myself to be carried. When my dad left the room, I think I waited just a few moments before getting out of bed to sit next to my door. I was listening for all the key indicators that the house was sleeping. What I remember is how long it took. Forever. I actually dozed off. When I woke up, the house noises had subsided. I figured my parents had been in their room for long enough and decided to make my move. Opening my door with such grace, I slid out of the doorway and started my way to the living room. A combo of tiptoeing and sliding until I eventually reached the couch. I dove into the couch, lifted the curtains, and then I sat wrapped in a blanket, peering out the window for Santa. It was snowing, and I could have sworn I heard sleigh bells, but I wasn't seeing anyone. I had a gut-wrenching thought. Maybe he'd already come. I squirmed out of the blankets and curtains, looked at the tree and the stockings. Phew, he hadn't arrived yet. As I maneuvered back under the curtains, I was shocked to see the man himself, Santa. He's walking, though. No sleigh, no reindeer. But I'm not picky. It's Santa. I realize that he's going to pass right by my house, but he's looking all over the place, at all of the houses, in all of the windows. What's he looking for? I think to myself. Then he stops in his tracks and gives another good look around at all the houses before his eyes land on me. He sees me, and I'm ecstatic. I start waving excitedly, trying so hard not to squeal. He waves back and then looks around before he starts walking toward my window. As he approaches, I notice that he's got a bag with him, and I assume it's full of presents. He mouths or whispers the phrase, "Do you want to come say hi to Santa, sweetie?" I shake my head yes, and he points to the front door. I leave the window to walk over to the door, where there's another long window that reaches the floor. I watch as Santa tries to open the door, but it's locked. I reach for the lock, unlocking the door. He tries again. From the other side of the door, I hear him say, "Okay, sweetie, you've got to unlock the other lock, the one that's on the doorknob." So I try to do what he's telling me, but for some reason I can't quite grip the lock. My little fingers keep slipping. Santa then tells me it's okay, just go to the back door. Brilliant. I scoot over to the back door and I wait for Santa. He rounds the corner and the light from the back deck turns on. Santa is fully illuminated. And I remember thinking, wow, Santa is a lot younger than I thought he was. Skinnier, too. The light seemed to scare Santa. He almost ran away until he saw me standing there. Then he proceeded to hustle toward the door, and he was telling me and motioning that I needed to be quick. He said he had something special for me, but then he had to go. He had leaned down and was reaching for something inside his bag. I unlocked the sliding door, and I pushed my hands against the glass, and I started to push the door by walking my body in the direction I needed it to open. I'll note that even today, this door is hard to open or close if at the wrong angle, but at 6 or 7, nearly impossible. Just as he turned around, I heard the door start to give way, and as soon as it had, the home was filled with the awful sound of alarms. I took my hands away from the door to plug my ears, and I looked at Santa. He looked panicked, and I noticed he was now holding some sort of rope in one hand and the bag in the other. He drops the bag and reaches for the sliding door, and he slides it open, no problem. He then reaches for me, but before I can reach back or move or anything, I'm swept up by my mom, as my dad kicks Santa square in the chest, knocking him back several feet and landing him on his backside. That's all I saw before my mom was rushing me to their bedroom and locking the door. My mom tells me that I didn't even cry at this point, which makes sense. I don't remember crying or even being terribly upset. Not until later. It was when my parents explained that the man who came to our house wasn't Santa. And my dad kept saying things like, "She still thinks he's real. Of course she tried to let the guy in." That's when I started crying. That was all while the police were there. What happened to the guy? He got away-ish. The guy took off once he gained footing. My dad didn't bother chasing him because he'd gotten the guy's wallet. The cops were also on the phone, and the guy left his bag behind. The bag wasn't filled with presents. My dad tells me it was filled with more rope, like the kind the man was holding. There was duct tape, candy, a hammer, lots of plastic bags, and miscellaneous clothes. Yeah, it's horrifying, but luckily, he was picked up just a few minutes after he left our house. Pretty hard not to spot a guy running around town dressed like Santa Claus. In the end, I forgave my parents for ruining the magic that is believing in Santa. Because, they did save my life.
This isn't a ghost story, but a real-life experience involving the most frightening human I have ever had the misfortune to meet. This happened at the end of the year 8 years ago. A new guy joined my team at work. He was a young guy and he wore fashionable glasses. I had to train this guy up. I had been training people for about 3 years, so it wasn't that hard. I like to think I do a good job too. A week after the new guy joined the company, I was informed that he was going to miss training because he had called in sick with a cold. I just want to remind you again that this was before COVID. But that year there were a bunch of bugs going around, so I didn't really pay too much attention to his absence. The week after, he called in sick again, and the week after that. Seems like he was ill every Monday. It went on like this for 4 weeks. The excuses varied each week from colds to stomach aches to headaches, I heard that he was living alone, and I guessed that this guy liked to party a little too much on the weekends or something. He would always come into work and offer weak apologies on Tuesdays. Well, my boss was really pissed off at him. He told him that the next time he's sick, he better bring a doctor's note. The following week, I heard from a colleague that he had called in sick yet again. I was livid since I was supervising him. In Japan, Christmas Day isn't a national holiday, so we don't usually work. Christmas isn't even a family event over here either so much. It's usually for couples. So when this guy called in sick on the 25th, I instantly thought he skipped work to have a date or something like that. I managed to convince myself of that. I was really annoyed because I had always wanted Christmas off to spend time with my girlfriend. And this guy just joined the company, kept skipping my training sessions, and had a 3-day weekend each week. I flew into a bit of a jealous rage. It wasn't fair and I hated it. So I grabbed his resume, and looked up his address and headed over to his apartment. I know I shouldn't have done that, but I think I was really stressed out at the time. It's no excuse though, really. I rang his doorbell and he didn't come to the door. I called his phone and he didn't answer. I guessed that he must be out somewhere enjoying another one of his sick days. I was thinking about what to do next and I put my hand on his doorknob and opened it. I was too curious to pass up this opportunity. I put my face to the gap in the door. It was dark in there and I couldn't see a thing. "Hey, you in there? Feeling sick, are we?" I said something like that, but I got no response. Then a thought came to me. What if he really was sick? What if he had some sort of undiagnosed sickness? I mean, I guess he could have been sick the whole time. I went into his apartment with the intention of checking on his well-being and thinking the worst, unsure of what I would find. What I found was something I could have never prepared for. It was dark in what I guessed was his living room, so I groped for the light switch. I managed to find it. When the light came on, I saw a woman sitting in a chair. I screamed. She was completely motionless. After a few seconds, I realized that she was a life-sized doll. It was super realistic. If you didn't look at it from the front, you'd never know that it wasn't a doll. It looked so lifelike. It was a pretty strange sight to turn on the light and to see a doll sat there in a chair in a once dark room. But what was on the table was just as strange to me. KFC. It's what we eat at Christmas in Japan. A Christmas cake and wine glasses. It was like he had set up a date with the doll. It also just dawned on me that I was now trespassing in this guy's house, since he clearly wasn't home. I didn't like what I was seeing here either, so that had me on edge. I began to sweat. I went to turn the light back off and slip out silently, when I heard, "Hey Kaidi, I'm back." There in the doorway stood the new guy from work. "Hey, boss. What are you doing here?" he said. I was sure I was trapped in the apartment of a madman. I didn't know what to do, I just wanted to go. I really shouldn't have come. I don't know if this guy had any other fetishes I should be worried about. He stared at me with a glare I had never seen from him at work. He looked like a completely different person. I thought we might get into an altercation, but that feeling slowly slipped away as I stood there dumbstruck. I had to say something before it turned into a felony. "I'm really sorry, I thought you were sick when you didn't come to the door or answer my calls. I came to check on you, and the door was open, so I came in. I mean, you've been sick a few times this year." "Oh well, Kaidi has a cold, so I was about to return your calls," he said. "Oh, that's Kaidi, well, she's very, very cute." I was babbling, there was no thought behind my words at all. I remember my back being wet with sweat. I didn't like how he was looking at me, and then he said, "Don't you think it's insane to walk into another person's apartment without permission? If I didn't return, right at this moment, I dread to think what kind of violent crime you would have committed against Kaidi. She's home alone." "Oh no, honestly, I would never do anything like that. I mean, I couldn't to a doll." I desperately swallowed the word doll. "You're lying? I know you're lying. Because you were going to kidnap her, weren't you? And then you were going to do what to her?" With that, he spun on his heels and stormed off to the kitchen. I needed to get out immediately. His apartment was on the second floor, but I did not let that stop me. I opened his window, stepped out onto his veranda, and then dropped down to the first floor. He must have heard me open the window because I could hear him scream with anger from behind me. "I'll kill you! You were gonna take her away!" His words became less and less coherent after that, but he kept screaming at me. I heard him throw open his door and run down the apartment stairs. I was screaming for someone to help me or call the cops. Unfortunately, this was the countryside and there weren't all that many houses around. I ran as fast as I could for about 20 minutes, certain that if I stopped, he would have taken my life. I got home and my cell phone was ringing. I felt for sure I dropped it when I climbed out of the window, but I guess that I didn't. I had an incoming call from my boss, so I decided to take it to explain what had happened. He cut me off and said, "The new guy's been arrested. What happened?" A police car had been on a routine patrol in his area, thankfully, and they had seen him walking the streets with a kitchen knife in his hand, looking menacingly. They asked him what he was doing, and he said that he was going to murder someone with my name. So they instantly arrested him. My boss picked me up and took me to work, where we waited for the police to come and interview us. The new guy was admitted to a psych ward, and naturally was fired. I still think about this each winter, and when I do, the same shivers race up my spine and my face goes red because I can still hear that knife slashing through the air as he chased after me.
The Day I Met Mother Christmas by Sir Pixel. Hello everyone, I'm new here, but my friend really thought you'd like to hear what happened to me. Sorry for any misspelling, I'm French. When I was around 20 years old, I was in my first apartment. I lived with other people before, but this time, I was alone. It was a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, inside a 3-unit small building. It was located behind another apartment building that stood between it and the street. Important to the story. I was on my couch, gaming, when I heard the door rattle behind me. I wasn't expecting any visitors, so I opened it with curiosity, and I see a woman in her 70s, dressed in a red winter coat with white fur. She looked like Mother Christmas in the flesh. Now, this isn't unusual, albeit a bit shocking, but still. When I asked, hi, what are you doing here? She said, "Well, this is my place. Where is Santa Claus?" Without warning, she pushed me aside, came inside my apartment, and started patting the wall. I asked her, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" She looked me straight in the eyes and answered in the most mentally stable way possible. "I'm looking for the secret passage. I have to go meet Santa Claus. Where is he?" With confusion on my face, she takes off and goes inside my bathroom. Standing in the bathtub, she started patting the wall next to it, mumbling something about Santa Claus again. I decided to call the police. They come over very quickly, but as soon as she hears me talking to them, she bolted off, saying, "Santa isn't here anyway." The police later found her in a patio pit in the apartment across from mine. She fell there. They don't know who she was, but they are now investigating.
Alright, so check this out. This story took place only last week, just before Christmas, when me and my friends decided to go out for a few drinks at Christmas. It was a usual night, but busier than normal, but we had a great atmosphere. We went to the usual bar that we go to that does special craft beers, which we love. While we were in there, my other college friend was there that I haven't seen in a while, and we were catching up with them. You know, the usual, how's work, how's family, all that. He suggested that we go to this new bar across the street. We finished our drinks and went across to this new place, and it was amazing. The place was jam-packed, but we had a great, welcoming atmosphere. So we managed to get a table, and when we ordered, I had to use the bathroom. While walking to the bathroom, I passed this black-haired girl who saw me and said hi while checking me out. I said hi back, and I kept going to the bathroom. I returned back to our table when my college friend said, "I have to go." So we said our goodbyes and we finished our drinks. My other friends suggested that we go to this late-night bar, and so we went there. After we got there, we saw that the place was quieter than usual, but it was just mainly couples, and we stayed and we ordered some drinks. A few hours had passed when these 3 girls came in and were at the bar ordering their drinks. They were very drunk, and who was with them? That same black-haired girl was there. She saw me and smiled at me, and I just smiled back at her. About 10 minutes later, she came over to my table and she said my name. I just looked at her and I looked at my friends, who also seemed puzzled.
What scared me the most is what she said next. She told me my address, my hometown, who I was, and she named every member of my family. Puzzled, I asked her if she knew me through one of my relationships, and she said, "No, I just know you." I've never seen her in my whole life other than earlier at the other bar. She started talking to one of my friends, and then I saw one of her other friends look in horror and walked over and grabbed the black-haired girl away from us. We just looked at each other stunned, like, what just happened? We decided to go out to the smoking area to have a smoke, and while walking towards a table, I passed this small blonde woman who called me by my name, and I just said hi, still confused. I looked back in that direction where she was, and she was with another girl, and I heard her say to her friend, "Damn, I called them by their name." And they left. We soon left too, and nothing crazy has happened since. Nearly everywhere I go, people always come up to talk to me. I seem like a friendly face, but I have had my few share of creepy encounters, and this story had me more puzzled than scared.
People say that Christmas is a time of joy, a time where family come together around the holidays and when miracles come true. What they don't tell you is that nightmares can come true too. Terrible nightmares as old as the known world. When I was 10 years old, one Christmas day, our grandmother had come to visit me and my 16-year-old brother Jessup. She often told us stories about Santa Claus and his reindeer, his elves making toys at the North Pole. However, this Christmas, she decided to tell us a different story, a dark tale that casted a shadow over Christmas. She told us the story of Krampus. He was a demonic creature that originated in Germany. His appearance was that of a goat and a man, a hideous monstrosity. Legend says he was the son of Hel, the Norse god of the underworld. He was born around the winter solstice, right around Christmas Eve. They say that he had taken a liking to the souls of children, preferably the naughty ones. And instead of giving these children gifts, well, he would come and snatch them away from their homes, taking them back to the underworld where he would punish them for all eternity. You see, young ones, the moment you allow greed and jealousy to seep into your hearts, it poisons the Christmas spirit, and it invites him to you. You have to keep the Christmas spirit pure. My brother Jessup, however, never cared much for our grandmother or her wild Christmas stories. All he ever cared about were his gifts under the tree, and would sometimes even steal mine just so he had more gifts than deserving. Oh, give us a break, Grandma. Are you actually saying if we're bad or don't respect Christmas enough that some dumb, ugly goat guy is gonna come and make us cry our eyes out? Jessup, please stop, I said. He never respected anyone but his own arrogance. You better hope that's all he does, Jessup. Making you cry would be the kindest thing he could do to you. The wrath of Krampus is not something to be taken lightly. I know. I saw it. One Christmas Eve, my sister and I, Sarah, were fighting over a necklace I had gotten for Christmas from my grandmother. It was beautiful. It was made of gold, and my sister couldn't stand that she didn't get it. Why do you deserve anything? I'm the older sister. I should have it all. It's not my fault you were bad this year. Good or bad, what's the difference? I am the first child, so that means I deserve everything. She never was very appreciative, vain, greedy, and selfish, all the things people should never be, especially during Christmas. Once you give in to those sins, it poisons your Christmas spirit and invites the more unpleasant spirits of Christmas. But that year, her greed invited the worst spirit of them all. We were out in the snow playing at first, but then she tried to take the necklace, claiming she was more deserving of it than me, that Christmas was a sham to be celebrated by weaklings who didn't have the courage to take what they wanted. But she did, and she paid the price for it. She tore the necklace from my neck, pushing me into the snow where I cried. She stood over me gloating, but then I saw it. The frozen snow-covered ground began to shake beneath our feet. The ice cracking, and from the jagged holes came a burning light that was bright as a lit fire. The hole opened even wider, and I could hear the cries of torment, suffering so great that my heart twisted in knots. As the hole widened, we saw him emerge. His clawed hands appeared from the darkness, pushing himself forward. Then we saw his horns, as long as deer antlers, except they were black and the tips of them looked sharper. His pupils were like that of a goat's, rectangular and horizontal. His mouth smiling with razor-sharp teeth, his body hunched over covered with gray-white fur, wearing bells on his neck, and hooves for feet. His demonic visage was the stuff of nightmares. No description could begin to detail how monstrous he looked. We were frozen with fear, unable to move, our legs shaking. He began to move forward, looking at both of us intensely. It was almost like he was trying to sniff us out, looking for the guilty one. Suddenly, he grabbed the necklace my sister was holding. He looked at the object curiously. His eyes widened when he saw my name had been engraved into it, realizing then that my sister had stolen it from me.
Naughty!
He said, looking at her with sadistic glee. He immediately got out his huge brown sack that was dirty and old. I swore it was stained with dried blood. She screamed with total fear, realizing what he was about to do. He grabbed her by her coat with his long claws, lifting her up like she weighed nothing at all. She continued to scream frantically as he dropped her into his sack, sealing it up with string made out of human hair. As he threw the bag containing my screaming sister over his shoulder, he looked at me suddenly, his goat eyes glaring at me. He began moving forward towards me with those hooves of his. I shook with fear, afraid that I was next to be dropped into his sack along with my sister. He reached out for my hand, grabbing it, and forced my palm to open. He then dropped the necklace that my sister had stolen from me in my hand, smirked and said, "Merry Christmas." He then departed with his screaming sack and returned to the underworld with my sister. I can still hear her agonizing cries to this day. And that, my little ones, was the night I met Krampus. "So, he's really real, Grandma?" I asked curiously. "As real as the falling snow. Take my word for it, keeping the Christmas spirit alive is far more important than you know. Your very mortal soul might depend on it," she said. "Yeah, that and my home allowance, right? Let's be honest, Grandma. Christmas isn't about giving or love or even family. It's about the freaking gifts. We get it. More importantly, I get it. And I'm supposed to believe that if I'm naughty, that some butt-ugly goat guy is gonna come get me and drag me off to hell? Give me a friggin' break, Grandma." My brother never respected the holidays much. All he ever cared about was his own greed and wants. "I hope for your sake that you change your mind, Jessup, for Krampus might come pay a visit to you this Christmas Eve," my grandma warned. After Grandma Pearl's visit, our parents soon took her back to the home and went out later for a Christmas party across town. It was just me and my brother Jessup left by our lonesomes. I was asleep in bed before I woke up to the sound of bells jingling. Was Santa here? It wasn't even 10 p.m. yet. He was too early to be dropping by already. I began walking down the stairs to take a peek. As I went down a few steps further, I saw that it was my brother Jessup tearing through Christmas gifts early. "Stupid basketball! What do they think, I'm 8 years old? Let's see what they gave little sis." He then started opening my presents. "He can't! Those were mine! He's taking what was given to me!" "Jessup, stop! I can't believe you would do this! You should be ashamed of yourself! It's Christmas and you're stealing my gifts! How could you do this, especially after what Grandma Pearl said about Krampus?" Grandma Pearl can kiss my ass, okay? I've told you, sis, time and time again. Christmas isn't about family. It's not about love. It's not about freaking charity or stupid fake Santa Claus. It's about getting what's coming to you, what you deserve. And tonight, I'm getting what I deserve, which is everything. Do you hear me? Everything. So why don't you... What's that sound? Suddenly, we heard the sounds of loud footsteps on the roof. Whatever it was big. The living room chandelier was shaking. It had a lot of weight, whatever it was. Then, we heard a growl coming from the chimney. Something big was moving through there. It was pressing hard against the bricks, trying to come all the way down, but it was having a hard time fitting. Then, it got quiet. Too quiet. Then, it burst from the wall by kicking its massive demonic hooves against the bricks, completely destroying the chimney. And there he stood, Krampus, just as Grandma Pearl described him, standing at 7 feet tall with his hooves, his long black demonic horns, his goat-like eyes, long dirty claws for fingers, his body covered with gray-white hair, his mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. He smiled at both of us while we were frozen in fear. Everything our grandmother said was real. Krampus was real. He then pointed his finger to my brother Jessup, who was shaking like a leaf.
Naughty!
He then pulled out his large brown sack and opened it.
Your gifts lie below, boy.
Jessup then panicked. He began to run from the living room as fast as he could, till Krampus used his leather whip to catch him by his legs and began pulling him forward. "Let me go! You're not taking me, you goat freak! Sarah, help! Don't let him take me!" I heard him scream over and over again. I couldn't help him. No one could. Like Grandma said, his greed invited Krampus, and now he was getting everything he deserved, just like he said he would. Krampus quickly dropped him into his large sack. He almost tried to pull himself out till the hands of feral children pulled him inside, dragging him further and further to the bottom. Krampus then took his hairstring and tied the sack shut. As he pulled the bag over his shoulder, he looked at me suddenly, his monstrous eyes staring up at me intensely. He began taking several steps towards me with his hooves. The vibrations of his movements shook the whole house, as he was right in front of me. I dare not utter a word out of fear, nor would I run, as it did not help Jessup when he tried. Krampus then took his long clawed finger, tapped me on my nose.
Nice,
he said, smiling. He then took out a toy from his pouch. It was an old porcelain doll that looked like it was made during the Victorian era. He offered it to me as a Christmas gift, which I reluctantly took from him.
Merry Christmas,
he said, leaving through the chimney from whence he came, along with my naughty brother who would suffer eternal punishment for his selfish ways. He allowed his own greed to poison his Christmas spirit, and it invited Krampus to collect his soul, just like Grandma Pearl said. Our Christmas spirit must be kept pure, for once it's gone, so are we. So, when next Christmas comes around, remember to tell yourselves to always be caring, giving, and to cherish your family with Christmas cheer. And more importantly, be good. For if you allow your selfish greed to stain the spirit of Christmas, old Krampus will come to collect you for the holidays. Merry Christmas, for all our sakes.
This took place several years ago, back when malls were relevant and a popular place to go. I was a single mother at the time, living with my parents until I saved enough to find a place on my own. My ex and I mutually split up because we didn't just jive well as a couple. We jumped into getting a house together way too quick, and neither of us could afford it on our own, so we sold it and I moved in with them. My job was 4 10-hour shifts, so I was at least thankful to have an extra day to spend with my daughter. She was 7 at the time, so I was trying to spend as much time as possible with her, not to mention she was my first child. On my day off during the week, we always had a girls' day, and would go get lunch, go to the park, or do some kind of activity together. The holidays were also a huge deal for my family, filled with events and time spent together. Hell, sometimes they even invited my ex over for dinner since he didn't really do anything with his parents. One of my favorite things to do with my daughter, though, for Christmas was the Craft with Santa night. The kids could see Santa, tell them what they wanted for Christmas, get their picture taken, and then usually had some kind of craft there, like coloring pages or painting an ornament, things like that, and she loved it. Unfortunately, this one year I ended up working the day of the event, so I had to rush home to get changed, to pick her up, and then head to the mall. They stopped at 8, and I got off at 6, so it was a rush. Thankfully, we got there while it was still going, but they had already started picking up some of the craft stuff, which was upsetting because they were doing these handprint reindeers, and I really liked stuff like that as a keepsake of hers as she got older. There was one kid with Santa as we got in the waiting line, and then Santa and I made eye contact. Being the person I was, I smiled, and he smiled back and winked. Then, it was my daughter's turn. As she started walking up, she asked the helper elf if she could still make a reindeer, and they started saying they were putting it away when Santa interrupted them, reassuring my daughter that she could do one, and insisted that they let her do one, and that he didn't mind staying a little bit later. I thanked them all, but the elf didn't seem too happy with the request. I stood by as my daughter talked the poor guy's ear off. She kept talking, and the guy would look up at me and smile, and then ask my daughter about me, like, "What does Mommy want for Christmas? What does Daddy do for Christmas? Oh, where is Daddy?" Things like that. After they finished, she went over to do her craft, and I tried to help pick up stuff as she finished, or that she wouldn't use. Santa was standing nearby, and we started talking. He complimented me, saying that I looked beautiful for someone with a kid her age. Thanks, I guess. He continued talking about my daughter, talking about what he did for work outside of being a Santa, things like that. Now that I think about it, I think he was really talking himself up at the time. When my daughter finished, we said goodbye and started walking over to the food court to get dinner. As we were walking out, I started hearing someone shouting, "Hey!" Of course, it was like an instinct to see who was shouting, and I turned around to see a man running over towards me and waving. I stopped as the guy caught up to me. I didn't recognize him at first until he started talking, and I realized that it was the Santa. He made a joke about me not recognizing him without the belly suit, and I laughed a bit. He asked me for my number and if we could get together sometime. I was a bit taken aback at first, as I never had this happen to me before, and being put on the spot, I didn't know what else to do but follow through. So I gave it to him. I told him I'll look into it, and we left. That did not turn out to be a good thing to do, though. This was about 3 weeks before Christmas, which was one of the busiest times at my work, So I didn't get a lot of free time, and the time I did have off was spent catching up on sleep and spending it with my daughter. I learned the Santa guy's real name was Drew, and he liked to text me almost every hour. That same night, he texted me saying thank you for the number and good night. I just responded back, "You're welcome," or something like that. It was kind of like first meeting someone and then getting to know them afterwards. He seemed fine at first, but as I mentioned with him messaging me hourly, if I didn't respond quick enough, he would then send messages like, "Hello? Are you still there? I miss you. I'm sorry, I know that I can be too much." Things like that. Again, I didn't know how to respond other than being nice and saying, "No, you're not too much," and things like that, just explaining that I work a lot. Then I told him where I worked to further explain. I work at a custom clothing store where we make things like uniforms in bulk for businesses, schools, and even just suits. We get a lot of business orders towards the end of the year, like they're using up the last of the budget. So we really don't have any downtime. A few days after telling Drew this, my boss came to get me telling me that I had a visitor, and reminded me that guests were not recommended since we had a lot of big machinery in there. I was very much aware of this as I never had visitors and never even really told anyone where I worked, other than my parents and ex in case of emergencies, so I had no idea who it could have been at first. As I started walking to the front, I saw Drew standing there with a bouquet of flowers. I again was polite and thanked him for the flowers, but I told him that I wasn't allowed to have visitors there. I also asked him how he found out where I worked, and he pretty much brushed off the question. He left shortly after, and I got back to work even with everyone looking at me. He was really nice, but I wasn't used to this, so I just took it for what it was and lived with it. I also didn't really tell my parents much about it beyond that I had sort of met a guy. And they were happy for me, but didn't really ask much more than that. And I didn't mention anything of our meeting each other to them. For the next few weeks, though, it just got worse. And as you can tell, I was quite the pushover. I wasn't the hostile type, and I typically just let things be, so when he started asking me for pictures, asking me my every move, where I was, and calling when I didn't respond, I didn't know what else to do but oblige. He just started calling me endearing names, started sending risque pictures and asking for them in return, and I just slowly became more and more of a recluse, afraid to go out and run into him. I ended up running late to drop my daughter off with my ex, and I never did that, and I guess between that and the way I looked, he could tell there was something wrong. He finally coaxed it out of me, and started asking about this guy, and I explained it all to him. He said I needed to report it to the police and stop responding to this guy. He also asked for his address, and that's when I realized that I still had no info on where he lived or did, other than that he was a mechanic. I didn't know what shop or where. Hell, it could have been a shop out of his own home. He knew more about me than I knew of him. Like I said, my ex and I didn't work together, but we did still care about each other, and he even told my parents and older brother about it when he came over once, so they all convinced me to start by blocking his number. That only worked for so long, and he then would begin calling and texting me from different numbers, so I had to get a new phone number. This just enraged him, as he showed up at my work again and caused a scene. Thankfully, I told my boss about this when I changed my phone number, so they knew that his presence was not welcomed. Thankfully, my boss was actually kind and understanding about the whole situation, and was glad to call the cops on him when he showed up. The first 2 times, she told him that I wasn't there at the time, claiming I was off or on lunch, but then he started getting more and more aggressive, so she called the cops on him. He was escorted away because we had strict rules about customers and trespassing. I also started having an officer follow me home on the days he showed up, just to be safe. Or my brother or ex would take me to and from work so I wasn't alone. It seemed to finally work as he stopped showing up at my work, and I stopped getting random friend requests from weird accounts on social media. So I was finally getting back to a normal life. My daughter's birthday was in early January as well, and all of her Christmas and birthday money was burning in her pocket, and she wanted to go shopping. The problem was that during her birthday party, I had slipped on the ice and actually fractured my ankle, so I once again had to rely on my parents and brother for help for a bit. My brother's car was being worked on, and I offered to let him use my car if he was willing to go with me and my daughter to the mall for a while, and he agreed. My daughter loved him too, so they always had fun together. We went to the mall and walked around as much as I could with crutches until we started to head out. We parked by the main entrance, and right before we walked out, there was one of those quarter machines that my daughter wanted to get something from. So, as I was digging out a quarter, my brother asked me nervously, "Hey, do you know him?" As I looked up, I saw Drew standing by the entrance intersection, hands balled in a fist and just staring at me angrily. I immediately started freaking out and telling my brother that we needed to go now. He grabbed my daughter to pull her in front of us, and I started grabbing my phone to call the cops when he just started screaming. I turned around and saw him charging toward us. Afraid he was going to hurt me, I shoved my daughter to the side and braced for impact when I heard a grunt and saw my brother fall to the ground. Drew was punching me and calling me a cheating whore, and my daughter was now screaming. Time just seemed to slow down, and I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, there was a mall security guy nearby, and another random guy that had pulled him off my brother and subdued him. My brother, however, is not as forgiving as me, and he pressed charges on him. I was also given the opportunity too, since he'd pushed me out of the way. I never saw him again after that. I was incredibly thankful that my brother was with me that day, because I had no idea what he would have done to just me and my daughter, but I also felt bad as my brother had to get a tooth replaced and had a black eye for a while. He teased me about owing him, but I think he was also just happy to be there that day. So, overall, if I learned anything, if someone asks you for your number, and if even a part of you isn't comfortable with it, say no. You are not obligated to give it to them. And also, tell someone if they start getting controlling. Don't go through what I did. It only lasted about a month or so, but it was one of the worst times of my life. So, Drew, I hope that you never meet me or my family again.
And here are the top comments for my last video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.